on the Appalachian Trail, you have a lot of time to think. And somewhat randomly, I've been thinking recently about what I would do if I had a time machine. Now, I think what I really would do is probably go about 5 seconds into the past because I like my life. I've got a really good life. I mean, like in the last video, like I said, I enjoy being a 21st century person. I really, really do. I wouldn't want to give that up. But let's say, that there are some rules, that you can only go into the past, and maybe you have to go 100 years before you were born or something, so you die before you actually would get to meet any of the people who give your life meaning now. And it's a one-way ticket, right? Let's say it's one-way ticket. Somebody puts a gun to your head, says you have to get in this time machine, one-way ticket, at least 100 years before you're born. I was born in 1991, so the latest I could go back would be 1891. So a lot of people, when they're asked this question, especially a lot of men, let's face it, they say something like, "Oh, well, I would just go back to like medieval times or whatever, and I would use modern technology and knowledge, and I would just dominate, and I would become the king or the emperor and stuff." And no, you wouldn't. Like, get real, that would never happen. Especially if you're going to go back someplace like medieval times. I mean, the Middle Ages, connections like family and social connections were just everything. And if you're just some outsider, some stranger, then you're gonna get killed. Even if you bring back an AK-47, oh, how many rounds are you gonna carry? How many rounds are you gonna bring back? Because you might be able to mow down one troop of cavalry that comes against you, sent by the Duke or the King or whatever, but you ain't going to be able to mow down them all. And I feel like the only way that you'd be able to dominate and become a king or an emperor or a queen or whatever in the past, if you time traveled, would be if you brought literally like a container ship full of people and materials and weapons from the modern age and luxuries and everything. Then maybe you'd be able to dominate. But I also feel like a lot of the history buffs who like to consider this question are like me, they're nerds. And let's face it, most of history has been dominated by jocks. I don't think we would fare very well in the, professions of knights or kings or queens or whatever. I mean, you have to be kind of a military strongman to be able to do that. And I also think that, actually, come to think of it, a couple years ago I wrote the series of short stories called The Halloween Event, and the premise was that the entire island of Britain gets sent mysteriously back in time about 950 years to the eve of the Norman conquest. And a big theme of that, although to be fair, it's more like, kind of historical fantasy than sort of hard science fiction. There are a lot of magical elements, but a big theme of that is that the sheer arrogance of 21st century people, just their inability to comprehend ever being beaten by medieval people, pretty quickly causes their downfall, and they have to sort of climb their way back up to the top. From there, spending the rest of the story doing that, really. Now it's pretty badly in need of revision and editing, but it's online. I'll link it down in the description if you're interested. But no, I think that I would, as somebody with a filmmaking background and a storytelling background, I would go back to a relatively safe and prosperous place where such skills would be valued, right? I'm thinking three things. So the first would be 1891, be the latest I could possibly go back, because then I could get in the ground floor of the film industry, of the silent film industry, and I would make, Star Wars as a silent film. Got every cut of those movies just memorized in my brain. Every note of the John Williams score is just completely just ingrained in me. So I think it'd be pretty easy for me to replicate that, totally rip it off. Totally unethically, of course, and just make boatloads of money. Alternatively, I might go back to like the late 18th century in Vienna and do a very similar thing, but be a composer. Now, I'm not sort of musically minded, but I feel like if I wrote a German opera called, the Tragedy of the Game of Thrones or something, and just ripped off that score, then I could make a lot of money and get quite a bit of prestige doing that. Now, the third place that I might want to go back to would be the Elizabethan era, and I would shack up with Shakespeare and Marlowe and all those guys. And just like write plays and act and just like travel with the players as they go from castle to castle and everything like that. You know, that would also be a good opportunity to rip off some modern ideas. You know, could, you know, go back and be the tragedy of the Batman. You know, um, and or the comedy of the Spider-Man who doth come home, you know, or something like that. And endless sequel possibilities, of course. I just replicate the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the Elizabethan era. I mean, I'm sure our people have already done it online. So, you know, that'd be pretty easy. So, yeah, I think in this whole sort of time travel scenario, you got to think pretty... got to think pretty carefully about what skills you actually, like, realistically have and where in history you could apply those skills. Because if you're like me and if you're just like a skinny nerd who exercises once a year when he goes on the Appalachian Trail, then you're not going to do well in probably 90% of eras. You need someplace very safe and very prosperous. If I had to go back to an unsafe or a sort of an unprosperous time like the Middle Ages or something, um, or, you know, sort of the Bronze Age collapse or something like that, then I would become, you know, like a monk or a scribe or just something that, you know, indoor work, you know what I mean? Indoor work. So it's just a fun question that I've been considering. I know that a lot of my answers haven't been exactly ethically sound, but, you know, I was a ghost tour guide for 4 frickin' years, man. I'm so past ethics at this point. All right, so this is almost certainly the last of the AT series, at least until my next big hike, and who knows when that's going to be. So I will not see you down the trail. Next time you see me, I will have my computer and I will be able to edit once again. That'll be really exciting. So, adios.